Okay, we're going to continue with fallacies of relevance. So we'll go over the remaining ones in this lecture capture video. So let's go to the fourth one, Hurley mentions. And this one is argument against the person. Okay? This is called argumentum ad hominem, and this is maybe a Latin word that you'd want to use. You've all heard of ad hominem before. It's when you attack the character of a person giving an argument instead of just going to the argument itself. So two arguers involved here. One arguer puts forth an initial argument, and then the second arguer responds not by showing that the initial argument does not logically follow, but by directing negative attention about the first arguer's character, and there are three forms. Okay, ad hominem, abusive. You hear an argument and you abuse the character of the first person. The way you abuse the person is attack their character. And of course, this has nothing to do with the argument that this person gave. And here's an example. Let's say you're dealing with someone who does have a bad character. I mentioned this in the previous lecture capture video. Even someone who has bad character can put forth a good argument. Okay, so you always want to deal with the argument and not the person's character. So here's an example. Before he died, poet Allen Ginsberg argued in favor of legalizing pornography. But Ginsberg's arguments are nothing but trash. He was a marijuana-smoking homosexual and a thoroughgoing advocate of the drug culture. So whatever you think of Ginsberg, the fact that he smoked marijuana, his sexual orientation, what he advocated, that has nothing to do with whether his argument in favor of legalizing pornography, and maybe he has views on civil liberties and things like that, and censorship. You want to attack what he argued here. You don't discredit that argument by talking about his character, okay? The next one is circumstantial. This is when someone puts forth an argument, and instead of dealing with their argument, you try to discredit their argument because there's a conflict of interest. Or, well, you're only arguing that way because you'll gain something. Or, you're arguing that way because your best friend is president. You could have your best friend be president of a company, right? You could be gaining something if something happens, arguing a certain way. But let's say you could put it this way. You may even put the same argument forward if those things were not happening. So let's maybe apply it to this one here. Let's say you're the Dalai Lama and someone says this. The Dalai Lama argues that China has no business in Tibet and the West should do something about it. But the Dalai Lama, here comes the ad hominem circumstantial, but the Dalai Lama just wants the Chinese to leave so he can return as leader. Naturally, he argues this way, therefore we should reject his arguments. Okay, so they're ignoring that maybe the Dalai Lama has really good reasons why China should leave Tibet. They're not dealing with that. They're saying you're only arguing this way, or discount the Dalai Lama's argument because there's a conflict of interest and he stands to gain. Now, if you're the Dalai Lama and you're at a press conference, and let's say someone in the audience raises their hand and says, isn't it true that if China leaves, you tend to benefit from all this? How could the Dalai Lama be quick on his feet? He could say this, you know what, I really would like you to look at the merits of my argument, but I can assure you, even if I wasn't going to be leader, and even if I wasn't going to gain anything, I still would put forth the same argument. Just because I probably would be the leader of China doesn't mean my argument, the leader of Tibet doesn't mean my argument is a bad one. I would do the same thing even if I had nothing to gain. And so this is why it's a fallacy. Even if you were going to gain by reasoning in a certain way, you still could be reasoning in the right way. It just happens that you're also going to gain. It may not look good and you may have to explain yourself. The best way to explain yourself is to say, even if I wasn't going to gain anything, you know what? I still would argue in the same way. And then the last one under the argument against the person is tu quoque. The second arguer appeals to the hypocrisy, bad faith of the first arguer rather than showing that the argument is a bad argument. Okay, someone's a hypocrite, or they're telling you to do something and arguing that you don't do something when you know darn well they used to do that or they do it. But here's the point. If someone's a hypocrite or is a bad example, can they actually still put forth a good argument? Of course they can. So, child to parent. Your argument that I should stop stealing candy from the corner store is no good. You told me yourself that you stole candy when you were a kid. Okay, that may be true. The mom or the parent could have done that, but still doesn't mean it's a bad argument. Then again, you're appealing to the hypocrisy of the parent putting forth the argument when the argument could still be good. Now, let me say something here just about bringing up the character of people. You can bring up the character of people, and sometimes this is very relevant. Just because you're bringing up character issues about something, about someone in certain situations, doesn't mean this is an argument against the person. It's only an argument against the person, an ad hominem fallacy, if someone puts forth an argument and you bypass the argument and discredit it by focusing on the arguer's character. But if no argument is being put forth, and you're bringing up their character like they're a witness in a court case, and they happen to be really good friends with the defendant, and they've already been accused of perjury, and they have been arrested, all these kind of things, those character issues may be legitimate to bring up depending on the case if you're allowed to. Or in other situations, character can matter. And that doesn't mean you're doing ad hominem. It only means you're doing ad hominem when an argument is put forth and you appeal to the integrity of the person putting that argument forward. Okay? And then here's, we're getting close here. Here's accident. Here's another fallacy. This is committed when a general rule is applied to a specific case it was not intended to cover. Typically, the general rule, and key here is general. You know, if you see something that's a general rule, it's cited in the premises, and then it's wrongly applied to a specific case where this specific case has certain nuances or accidental features that make the general rule really shouldn't just be applied to this case carte blanche, okay? So let me give you some examples. Freedom of speech is a constitutionally guaranteed right. Now, freedom of speech is a constitutional right. There's a tip-off. That's kind of like a general rule, right? Therefore, John Q. Radical should not be arrested for his speech that incited a riot last week. Well, the fact that we have freedom of speech, this is political speech, journalism, you can write, you can say what you want, and if someone doesn't like what you're saying and they're offended, tough luck, Americans have the right. That general rule doesn't allow someone to use their speech in such a way that it causes circumstances that result in injury, death, harm to other people. So you cannot apply this to that and say he shouldn't be arrested, because that general rule was never meant to allow something like this. This is not an absolute general rule. Okay, and I can give you another example here. Here's one. Property should be returned to its rightful owner. So if you're looking at these and going, what fallacy is being committed? That sounds like a general rule. You know, private property rights. Okay, that's good. We all believe in that. So here's a situation where you shouldn't apply this without thinking things through. That drunken sailor who is starting a fight with his opponents at the pool table lent you his .45 caliber pistol, and now he wants it back. Therefore, you should return it now. Okay, this would be the fallacy of accident, because if you're drunk and you're in a fight, sure, that is your gun, and it's your private property, but you don't give that gun to that sailor in that situation. And so this would be the fallacy of accident. What you tell this drunken sailor is that no one's disputing that this is your gun, it's your private property. What we're disputing is that if this is the right time to give it back to you. So we're not disputing this general rule, but that general rule doesn't mean we can't be wise in when you're able to enjoy your property and have it back and when it should be taken away because there are other issues of harm or danger involved. Okay? Fallacy of accident, both of those examples, there's a general rule that you can see. Okay? General rule, that'll be your tip-off. Okay, let's go down to straw man. Straw man is committed when an arguer distorts an opponent's argument, position, or beliefs because the distortion is easier to attack and refute and even ridicule. Often the refuter then believes or wants the audience to believe that the original argument has been easily refuted. A straw man was set up and knocked down only to conclude that the real man has been knocked down as well. The first argument is refuted by posing it inaccurately and in a less rational way and refuting that distortion. So really what this means here is when another side has a good argument, straw man is, I'm going to distort that argument. You make it a caricature, make it sound absurd, a little bit more ridiculous, purposely misrepresent them, purposely misparaphrase them, shoot down the bad argument. Okay? Then they'll think this bad argument is really what the other side believes, and it's easier to refute, and the audience, I'll score some points. Okay? You don't want to do that. And here's just a rule of thumb. If you don't bring up the other side's really good arguments, they're just going to bring them up later anyway. But if you misrepresent them, you haven't really refuted their position. You've refuted a straw man position, a fake position, a position that is not the other person's. Okay? And if you're looking at a little, one of the problems in Hurley, and you're trying to figure out, is this straw man? If you read it and it seems to kind of make you want to say, hey, you're misrepresenting my views, if you're sensing that, then you're probably dealing with straw man. And Hurley, he gives things away a little bit. When you see the words obviously, this is someone paraphrasing, okay? Or they're making something sound a little exaggerated or ridiculous, you could be dealing with straw man. So here's some examples. Mr. Goldberg has argued against prayer in the public schools. Obviously, he advocates atheism, but atheism is what they have used in Russia. Atheism leads to the suppression of all religions and the replacement of God by an omnipotent state. Is that what we want for this country? I hardly think so. Clearly, Mr. Goldberg's argument is nonsense. So there's another clue for straw man. Obviously, is conveying, here's what he's saying, and if it sounds like it's exaggerated or nonsense, you even see that word, you could be dealing with a straw man. And here's the thing, this is a straw man because you have people who are theists. They're religious, they believe in God, and they've got their various reasons why they don't want prayer in the public schools. So just because you're against prayer in the public school doesn't necessarily mean that you're an atheist. Here's another example. The garment workers have signed a petition arguing for better ventilation on the work premises. Unfortunately, air conditioning is expensive. Air ducts would have to be run throughout the factory and a massive heat exchange unit installed on the roof. The cost of operating such a system during the summer would be astronomical. Okay, here's some exaggerating words. Astronomical, that's certainly serious. In view of these considerations, the petition must be rejected. Okay, they're just asking for ventilation. This is like swamp cooler fan stuff. They're not asking for air conditioning. But if you go to your boss and say the workers down on the work floor want air conditioning, that's easier to give it to the boss, and the boss says no, right? Because it's too expensive. But ventilation, possible, right? So these garment workers would say, hey, we're not asking for air conditioning. That's a straw man. We're asking just for ventilation. Okay, there's another example. And then the last one, this is very common. Religious faith is blind and this is irrational. I've watched a debate here or there between a religious person who believes in God and an atheist, right? And many times the atheist will say these people, these religious people, believe in God blindly. They squint their eyes, they have wishful blind belief, they believe in God without any evidence, and God doesn't want them to look at evidence, He just wants them to wishfully believe in a blind way. Well, actually, that is an absolute stereotype. Your religious philosophers, your deep thinkers who are religious, never ever define faith as believing in something without ever looking at evidence. Actually, they say faith really is only trusting in a person, object, or concept or reality after you have looked at convincing evidence that points that what you want to put your trust in most likely exists. And so if someone who's religious says, I have faith in my mom and dad, doesn't that imply that mom and dad exist? Then you trust them. It isn't, I hope there's a mom and dad in my life, and I'll just pretend that there is, and if I just decide and believe that they're there, this will help me even though I have no evidence. That's not what it means. It means mom and dad exist, and therefore I trust them. So religious faith is trusting in something through good evidence you have good reason to believe really exists. And it's not irrational. And it's not blind. So if, for example, an atheist says they believe things blindly, that's a great example of a straw man. And invariably the other person, when they get a chance to talk, says that is not what faith means in our tradition. That's an urban legend. Okay, let's go to, I believe we're at the last one here. No, we're not. We're at the second to last. Missing the point. The premises of an argument support one particular conclusion, but then a different conclusion, often vaguely related, is drawn from the particular premises. There's an ignorance of the logical implications of the premises. The correct conclusion implied from the premises is not the conclusion that is being taken from those premises. A different conclusion is identified. Okay, so what's going on here is you have an argument, there are certain conclusions, and someone comes up with a conclusion that causes you to say, you got to be kidding, where do you get that from my statements, my evidence I gave? You're totally missing the point of what I'm wanting to argue for and what we can really argue from. You're going way beyond, okay? So here's some examples. Crimes of theft and robbery have been increasing at an alarming rate lately. The conclusion is obvious. We must reinstate the death penalty immediately. Okay, crimes of theft and robbery have been increasing. But where from that do you get that we have to reinstate the death penalty? Okay, you can't get that from this at all. You're missing the point. And a lot of theft and robbery are not capital crimes deserving of capital punishment. Okay? And let me give you another example of missing the point. Abuse of the welfare system is rampant nowadays. Our only alternative is to abolish the system altogether. Okay, let's say you had welfare abuse. Where from that does it mean we got to abolish the whole system? How about reform it? How about let's make changes so we eliminate the abuses, get people off welfare faster, make sure it's not a system that creates dependency on and on. But you see here, someone's going to make this statement, and then you come along and say this, and the person who thinks it's abuse is going to go, where are you getting this? We can't go there from this. You're totally missing the point. I'm not here to argue to abolish the system altogether. I'm here to argue that we need to eliminate the abuses. You're missing the point, okay? You're deriving a conclusion that you have no warrant to derive. The premises don't go that far. They don't imply that. Okay, we have the last one, red herring, okay? This is committed when the arguer diverts the attention of the reader or listener by changing the subject to a different, but sometimes subtly related one, sometimes distracting, often reaching a conclusion implied by the new diversion, and the diversion is seen as a way to win the argument against the original topic. The original topic was never shown to be logically incorrect. Okay, so you're having a discussion, you're putting forth premises, and then there's a diversion. You go down a different line that could be related, because sometimes when the red herring or the diversion or going down a different tack, it can be subtly related, which means sometimes you don't even know that they're changing the subject. You've got to really be careful about this. And your book has something interesting. You remember where the term red herring came from if you read your chapter. Training bloodhounds or dogs, they'd take them to a fork in the road and they'd run a herring along the ground. You know, they'd have some herring in a newspaper and take it down one of the forks in the road. Of course, the bloodhound or the dog or hunting dog's going to smell that. but they're trying to train the dog. The red herring scent is a new smell, right? They want to train the dog, don't let this new smell distract you from the original scent, like someone's sweater or whatever they're trying to really go after in the beginning or hunt. You stay on that scent, and you don't let this red herring scent cause you to divert and go off track. So that's where this came from. Red herring is when someone takes the argument in a new direction. And if you find yourself saying, you know, whoa, wait a minute, we're not really talking about that right now, let's not change the subject. If you find that that's appropriate in a situation, probably someone is committing a red herring fallacy. So here's an example. Environmentalists are continually harping about the dangers of nuclear power. Unfortunately, electricity is dangerous no matter where it comes from. Every year, hundreds of people are electrocuted. Some accidents are caused by carelessness, and they could be avoided if people would exercise greater caution. Okay, you see, here's the red herring is right here. Red herring, the dangers of electricity. But when environmentalists are continually harping about the dangers of nuclear power, they're talking about radiation. Now, it is true that nuclear power, through nuclear energy, it produces energy that turns turbines to produce electricity. But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about radiation dangers. Okay? They switched it to electricity. So this is a clear case of red herring. But you see how this is vaguely related to nuclear power? If you're not careful, you may be unaware that they're going down a different subject. So you've got to be logically sharp and say, I'm talking about radiation, I'm not talking about electricity. You change the subject, the fallacy, red herring fallacy has been committed. Okay, here at the end, just a couple tips with all this. If you have a hard time distinguishing, or you keep getting confused with two different fallacies, this is where you want to stop and go, okay, what is the difference between this fallacy and that one? How are they each distinct in their own right? And this is going to require some mental thinking on your part. And I have found from my experiences, students confuse straw man, red herring, and missing the point a lot. So you want to say to yourself and think, what is straw man about? How is it different than red herring? How is red herring different than straw man? How is red herring different than missing the point? How is missing the point different from straw man? I've given you some things here that maybe can help. Straw man is when you find yourself able to say, hey, that's not what I believe at all. You are misrepresenting my position. Okay? And so what's happening is premises are changed to new premises. Okay, new premises can be generated, giving rise to a new conclusion relevant to these new premises, okay? The original argument has not been knocked down, but this little phrase is good. If you can say this, then you're dealing with a straw man. Red herring, remember, is if you find yourself able to say, hey, stop. We are not talking about that subject right now, okay? So the arguer, he's ignoring what you said and he's changing the subject, and a lot of times you may not notice this because it's subtle. Like up here, electricity is subtly connected to nuclear power, but it was a clear change. So new premises are generated, giving rise to a new conclusion, but basically what's happened, the whole argument and direction has changed. Now missing the point is, they don't change the premises, okay? They just derive a conclusion that's unwarranted, okay? It's an unwarranted conclusion from the same premises. So if you find yourself saying, hey, you can't get that, come to that conclusion from my previous statements, okay? So hopefully that will help. And maybe another line up here for straw man is, what if you said, you know, hey, you are putting words into my mouth. You are putting words into my mouth, okay? And that's not what I said, that's not what I mean, you're misparaphrasing me, okay? And then one other tip here I'm going to put at the end with these informal fallacies. Don't overanalyze or underanalyze. Okay, and what I mean by this here is when you're looking at these, it's going to say what fallacy is being committed. You want to pick the one that is screaming the loudest, okay? So you have certain choices, and like when you do the exercises in section 3.2, it's going to say identify the fallacies of relevance. So you're going to look at these, let's see, you're going to look at the first 8 groups that we talked about. And I think there's a page in your book that lists them all on one page. If you could find a copier and get all of that list on one page, then you won't have to go flipping back and forth through your book. But one bit of advice I could give you is the first one I had set up here. If you are confused about how 2 are different, do some mental work and find out how they're distinct. I gave you 3 here that are common with students. Hopefully these things, what I wrote down here and explained helps. So you don't get these mixed up. And the other one is you want to pick the fallacy that is screaming the loudest. Screaming the loudest, okay? So you could look at something and go, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. For you to develop a good critical mind, you have to know the difference between the possibilities. You always want to pick the best identification of which fallacy is being committed. Don't get locked up into a little word or a phrase that may be irrelevant. I often have students come to me and go, Dave, it could be this, this, and this. And when they overanalyze and split hairs, I get a lot of students who think they're really smart. You know what I tell them? This doesn't mean you're smart at all. It means you have the inability to make a good decision, and you're going to be indecisive in the workplace and maybe won't make a very good manager. In life, there are always different possibilities. Always. You've got to pick the best one. So if you're looking at something and it could be 1, 2, or 3 fallacies are in the running and you're trying to identify which one, don't underanalyze. You got to look at this and look for clues, but don't overanalyze. Know where you're not to split hairs. What is screaming the loudest, shouting the loudest at you? And I can maybe give you one example. There's an example in the book where the first premise said, FDR said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, right? We have nothing to fear but fear itself. And then the conclusion was, therefore, women have no reason to fear a serial rapist. Now that is a bad argument, because FDR is just talking about we have nothing to fear but fear itself, about World War II, staying in the war, getting in the war, being courageous, doing what we need to do, right? He was not thinking about, when he said we have nothing to fear, obviously he didn't mean there we have nothing to fear and women can go around walking in the dark at night all by themselves in the worst parts of town. But this student, she couldn't get off the word nothing to fear. And I said, you were overanalyzing. FDR there didn't mean by nothing to fear nothing whatsoever. That's part of a speech and you're taking it out of context. You're overanalyzing, and I told her you're making bad decisions here. So don't overanalyze. It doesn't mean you're smart. It means you might, at this point, not make a good manager, and you need to work on finding the best explanation. Okay, we're done with fallacies of relevance, section 3.2, and your next lecture capture video, we will deal with the next group of fallacies, and let me see what those are. The next one's going to be dealing with fallacies of weak induction. Bye-bye.